Yes, now I think it's working. Yeah, okay. So welcome in group session 4. The aim of this group session is to give you an overview of the efforts we are doing with a few initiatives on measuring biodiversity performance by businesses and financial institutions. As you all know, this is a huge challenge. It is not an easy thing. We are very much aware of the business request to prepare simple approaches and simple metrics to measure biodiversity, but biodiversity is a complex issue, so measuring biodiversity is not always so easy too. We will try to give you an overview of what we are doing under the EU Business and Biodiversity platform and under the Aligning Biodiversity Measures for Business initiative. Also, one of the presentations is about environmental footprinting and the link to biodiversity, to what extent biodiversity is taken into account in environmental footprint approaches, or what the future plans are in that respect. And we have also a presentation by a Spanish company, Ferrovial, who also will give a reflection from their perspective on all these things that are happening. But Ferrovial has also its own approach. Together with Creando redes, they developed an own approach. So, under workstream 1 of the EU Business and Biodiversity platform, which is about natural capital accounting approaches and which I am leading, we decided last year, in 2018, to start assessing approaches on measuring biodiversity performance for businesses. So there are a number of initiatives popping up, a number of tools, methodologies, metrics, commercial or not commercial, but each with their own specificities and own approach. And we decided to let's do an objective and independent assessment of all these approaches. So in 2018, we had our first assessment. You can find everything, by the way, on the platform's website. We prepared the first report. We called it the Update 1 report because it's our intention to prepare annual updates. So within a few weeks, hopefully by the end of November this year, we'll have the Update 2 report. And I will come to that immediately. So the scope of our assessment approach is that we take into account methodologies that rely on quantitative indicators. So it's not just checklists, it's quantitative assessment of biodiversity performance, and it's very much related to the impacts. So to a lesser extent, it's focused on dependencies. Some approaches also focus on dependencies, but this might be something for the future to widen the scope, and which are not case-specific. What we mean with that, we haven't considered company-specific approaches. So the approaches that we assess should be available to everyone. Yeah. So this is the list. I don't go into detail. You can find everything in the report. So the assessment is takes into account a number of criteria. What we consider as very important is the type of business application that you are interested in as a company. I come back to that, but it's about the use of the metric for your company. And these types of uses can vary a lot from company to company, but also depending on the specific situation within the company. Other criteria, natural capital protocol criteria on relevance, are all these tools, are they really relevant? Do they really take into account all the relevant biodiversity issues for the company? The methodology, of course, and the type of metrics, the impact drivers, the pressures that are taken into account, because there is no approach that takes into account all potential impact drivers. So that's for sure. The input data, the level of detail, do you need to use real data or is it relying on modeling? The user friendliness, the sectors, and so on. We came out with a number of findings, but one of the findings was that we saw a number of similarities between many tools, and in fact what we see is that many tools follow the same logic. They start with, of course, a scoping, so you need to decide as a company, what will I focus on, which activity of the company, what type of products. And then step 2 is the link between these economic activities and the pressures. And then the third step is the link between the pressures and the biodiversity impacts, where you can use pressures, coefficients, sorry, for linking these pressures to impacts. And we noticed that especially step 2 and 3 often rely on the same underpinning models or data sources. For step 2, it was the axio-based, matrix-based input-output model. Sorry to become technical from time to time, but I just give the observation. And for step 3, we often saw that Globio and Recipe, for those who might be familiar with the names, often come back as underpinning approaches for linking pressures to impacts. And in terms of data sources, many companies rely, or many approaches rely on IUCN Red List and IBAT for assessing biodiversity values. So that also means that the strengths and weaknesses of these tools, these biodiversity measurement approaches that rely on these underpinning models and data sources, well, they are to a large extent defined by the strengths and weaknesses of these models and data sources. So this was then one of the ambitions for this year, to understand also Globio and Recipe. So it's not our intention to prepare scientific and very technical reports, but we need at least amongst a number of, within the core team, to understand how these tools are functioning, on what they are based on, to be able to better explain to the businesses how they can make the best choice in terms of the measurement approach. Anyway, what we also see, so at this moment we still we have limited the research to assessing methodologies, mainly because concrete applications of these methodologies were relatively scarce. We see now for a number of these approaches that the number of cases, applications is increasing, which is fantastic news. So our ambition is to start assessing case studies. We need to find a suitable approach for that, but we have a quite critical attitude. We want to know if the measurement approach really addresses the right issues and delivers the right outcomes. Yeah. So that's our ambition for the next years. So the update 2019 report, you can find already first preview. There's a teaser already on the website, mainly related to the decision tree. I will come back to that. But this year, it's a joint effort by the platform and the ABMB initiative. Julie Dimitrijevic will immediately explain this initiative. We have included a number of additional approaches. The existing measurement approaches were updated, if relevant. We have now specific chapters on Globio and Recipe. And of course, we had quite some technical workshops last month. We started in March with a technical workshop in Brussels. There was last week in Rio a technical workshop, and we try to incorporate all this information into the new update report, and also the feedback that we hope to get from you today will also be incorporated in the next thing. So and now I have to skip the rest of my presentation because this is for the introduction of the discussion with you as a group. And now I give the floor to Julie from UNEP-WCMC, who will introduce you to the ABMB initiative.
Thank you. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Julie Dimitrijevic, and I'm here on behalf of UNEP-WCMC, which stands for UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre. So we are based in Cambridge in the UK, and we're seen as the biodiversity experts for UN Environment. and I'll be describing to you what we've been doing for the Aligning Biodiversity Measures for Business project, which, as Johan has mentioned, complements the work that he's doing at the EU Business for Biodiversity program. So this program was started about a year and a half ago. I think it's been in the works for a few years now. But the bulk of the work started earlier this year, based on some trends that Annalisa Grigg, my coworker who is not here today, noticed in the biodiversity realm. So she saw that there was an increasing demand for credible reporting and disclosure on biodiversity measurement approaches and reporting. She also saw that the CDC wanted enhanced transparency on these reporting and disclosure documents that were being provided. The Global Reporting Initiative also requested or is considering implementation of biodiversity indicators. And there's also, and through this, there's been an increase in the number of measurement tools available. So she recognized that there's a need to find common ground between these different biodiversity measurement approaches that are currently in development. So right now we're assessing 12 different measurement approaches, and we're looking forward to see how they apply to policy discussions as we move forward into the big year on biodiversity in 2020 at COP15. And so we see the Aligning Measures project as this kind of coordinating effort and technical hub of information to help businesses implement these methodologies and also provide information to policymakers on how to better incorporate biodiversity measurement information into their frameworks. And this also complements the Natural Capital Protocol's supplement on biodiversity, which is currently in development. So just to reiterate, the aim is to help key stakeholders better understand how to measure, monitor, and disclose information on biodiversity impact assessment. We're hoping to develop a foundation of common ground principles to help evaluate the effectiveness and management of the impacts and dependencies that these biodiversity measurement approaches identify, and then also work towards policy recommendations. So it's important to recognize that there's a number of organizations involved in this initiative. So UNEP-WCMC coordinates the efforts between multiple tool developers. Businesses are involved who have been piloting certain methodologies. And then we also have conversations with policymakers moving forward. So as Johan mentioned, we held our first workshop in Brussels in March earlier this year. And here we convened a number of institutions to try to determine which measurement approaches are available and which ones should we be looking at. So 12 measurement tools were decided. And we also laid the foundation for common ground principles that would be discussed moving forward. And it was decided that the best way to look at the different measuring tools and break them down would be to develop 5 subgroups, which I will explain to you. So the first subgroup 1 is on business applications and targets, and this is run by Johan, which he will go into further details at the end of the session before we have a discussion. And the idea is to look at the different business applications and targets available based on your organizational focus. And we're trying to develop a decision tree that will help businesses understand which tools are available and which ones they could use to answer specific questions. And so this could be something different for a site level focused organization to up to a supply chain. And so we also have developed a matrix that provides a visual representation of these different methods that are available and how you can utilize them. So we have subgroup 2, which is focused on scope, boundaries, and baselines. So here we're trying to tease apart the different ways methods define scope, boundaries, and baselines. With the understanding that a lot of these methods are currently in development, so it is an iterative process of understanding how do you define your scope. What do you include? Do you include upstream, downstream, direct effects? If you define a baseline, is it a pristine state? Is it when you start the implementation of your project. And based on which baseline you choose, how does this impact your results? And then also we want to examine between the different 12 methods available, if the different methods are choosing different baselines, how does that affect your outcome? And can we find common ground in the terminology used between these different methods? So subgroup 3 is on data sets and metrics. And so here, this is led by Joshua Berger of the CDC Biodiversity. So he's been examining the data sets that are available for input into these different metrics. How can they link up? And then what are the differences between them? And then he's also looking at metrics available that are being developed. So things like mean species abundance. And then also he's trying to identify common ground principles to further move this discussion forward. Lastly, we have subgroup 4, which is on disclosure. So this is led by Joel Houdet of the Endangered Wildlife Trust in South Africa. And he's been examining measurement approaches and looking at financial reporting and accounting reports to see how they meet current policy goals. And again, the big word here is common ground principles. So how do we ensure that the different measurement approaches are reporting the values in the same way? So be transparent and consistent, things like that. So as Johan mentioned, we were in Rio de Janeiro last week hosting a workshop to bring together tool developers and businesses to discuss the work that had been done. So these subgroups held multiple webinars over the summer, and we wanted to, which helped create some working papers to tease out the information that had been amalgamated in terms of where these different measurements approaches aligned and differed. Discuss the common ground principles that were proposed, and then identify gaps for businesses on what is working for them if they are currently looking at corporate indicators of biodiversity, and then also what isn't working and how can we help improve the utilization of these tools that are available. So we made quite a bit of progress. We had a 3-day workshop. The first day focused on just kind of letting businesses know what's going on. So we had a number of presentations and panel discussions. We had about over 50 people in person and about 30 people attending online. So we did try to get a global representation if anyone was interested. We did realize that further work is needed to embed the thinking within these decision trees and the guidance documentations. We're hoping to refine the work Johan has started on the decision tree. We'd like to put forward policy recommendations, which will be presented at the open-ended working group in mid-February, which would lead into COP15. And we're also interested in piloting the different recommendations that are put forward from the tool developers, which if a business was to pilot, say, the decision tree, we would like to present this information at the World Conservation Congress in June in Marseille. And so if you have any further questions, please come let me know. And if you're interested in getting involved in the project, we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you very much, Julie. And Julie was too modest to mention that she's leading subgroup 2 together with the team of UNEP-WCMC. And also I participated in Rio remotely, to limit a little bit our footprint, our carbon footprint. Now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Anders Schryver from the European Commission, more particularly from the environmental footprint team of the Commission.
Go through it? Okay, this is me. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anders Schryver. I'm from the European Commission, and I work for DG Environment. My goal for the next 10 minutes is to give you a bit of an insight of what we are doing on the level of environmental footprint. And I will start with why did the Commission start to develop this, what it is, and what are our plans? So first of all, in 2010, already 8-9 years ago, it was already known that there was a proliferation of green claims. We got a lot of requests from industry already at that time to create a fair, level playing field for companies to have fair competition on the level of green claims and labeling. And so the European Council actually wrote in their conclusions, they asked the Commission to come up with a common methodology to avoid that when you do a calculation, environmental impact calculation of one product, to get different results because of the different methods that are out there today. Because of this problem, we cannot use life cycle assessment in policy making. And so we are aiming to have reproducible, comparable, and verifiable results in order to apply it in policy. So also, I mean, we have been doing in the last years quite some, we had some contracts, some market research about the number of labels, green claims, and we saw that around, I'm going through the things, that today in 2019 there are more than 460 labels, only, eco labels available worldwide. So you can imagine this is quite confusing. Around 19% of the consumers actually buy green products, but 94% says that they want to protect the environment, that is important. But we also see that 50% of the stakeholders say that green claims are misleading, and that is what we would like to tackle. So we started to develop in 2010 the environmental footprint methodology. Environmental footprint methodology is a life cycle-based method. We published the first version of it in 2013. It's built on existing methodologies, like, for example, ISO. So we didn't reinvented the wheel, but we built it on existing methods, and we try to be aligned with what is out there today. And we published last year the latest guidance, one guide on how to calculate the environmental impact of products, and one guide on how to calculate the environmental impact of organizations. So what does these guidance documents show you? So it's around 200-300 pages of document each. First basis is it's life cycle based. So we say you have to take into account the use and the end of life, the production of your raw materials, so the whole supply chain, to avoid trade-offs. Second, next to that, there is quite some detailed modeling rules on which data you should use, how to model agriculture products or electricity use, or the use stage, or end of life, how to deal with recycling, recycled materials, things like that. But more important also is that it's based on 16 different impacts, environmental impacts. Here I present you the names, but the exact numbers, the exact methods to be used underneath are strictly defined and fixed. So if you, for example, we have here, does it point? I don't know. We have here land use. If you want to calculate with methodology land use, everybody uses exactly the same characterization numbers. Next to this, we also have the allowance to have additional environmental information, like, for example, the percentage of certified fibers. And if you see in these 16 indicators, you will not see one that says biodiversity, why we're all here. But we have 8 of them that are connected to biodiversity. Some people would say it's more like stressors that then can be connected towards biodiversity, but 8 are directly linked to biodiversity. We see specifically also land use. I mean, very shortly, for us, land use, it's in principle, it measures the soil quality through 4 different indicators. So where do we stand today? So in 2013, we published the first recommendation of common methodology from the Commission, and we started a pilot phase. This pilot phase ran until last year, so mid-2018, where we tested with 23 different sectors this methodology, and also to develop sector-specific or product group-specific rules. So today we are in the transition phase. The transition phase is exactly starting from the pilot phase and ending when a policy is in place. Definitely no date connected to that. We hope soon, but you know how things go. During this transition phase, we will work on 2 levels. First level is technical, and that is also partly why I like to talk to you, is that we are working on methodological improvements. And one of them is also biodiversity. Second part that we are doing in the transition phase is discussing policy options and to discuss how we can use this methodology into policy making. Regarding the first one, methodological developments, we have a technical advisory board. This board is completely open for all experts in life cycle assessment or technical experts. We meet 4 times a year. The next meeting is actually next week. And this gives us advice and gives us expertise that we then use to work further on improvement of the methodology. Under this technical advisory board, we have an agriculture working group. This working group is not running yet. We are at the moment drafting the mandate, and it will start next year. The mandate, these are the 6 main points of the mandate, and you see here also in between the red lines that we will work on an indicator, an additional indicator or a better indicator on biodiversity to implement into the environmental footprint framework. So I don't know yet how it will be. Today we have these 8 indicators. It could be an indicator next to it. It could be an improvement of the current indicators. These kind of things are to be discussed. So regarding biodiversity impacts, so we will start working in this working group starting from next year, January next year. We foresee the following steps on biodiversity. First, mapping of existing methodologies. A lot has already been done. A lot of maps are out there. And we will certainly base ourselves on the work what was just presented, also on the work what the Joint Research Center is doing. So we will use the existing work out there. And then look at what are the suitable options in the case of environmental footprinting, product or organization related. Testing options if necessary, because during this transition phase we will have 5 additional sectors doing case studies, probably around 80 case studies, company-specific case studies on environmental footprinting, so we could use those to test additional methodologies, and then make a proposal on how to assess better biodiversity in the environmental footprint context. The timeline for this is not really precise. It has to be there before policy is in place. So I'm thinking 1.5 years, more or less, that we should foresee. So, talking about policy, with the new commission coming into place, they announced, or she announced, Ursula von der Leyen announced a new European Green Deal in the first 100 days. And this European Green Deal has quite some strong links to biodiversity. We have here all the links connected. We have a biodiversity strategy that is included in their circular economy action plan. We have a farm to fork strategy, zero pollution strategy, a digital agenda, sustainable Europe investment plans, green financing, just transition instruments, and the EU climate law. The ones in green are, from our perspective today, who has the strongest link with environmental footprint, and where we are really trying to integrate our tool into these new initiatives. Again, this is only a few months old, so it's really ongoing discussion. Regarding integrating biodiversity in environmental footprint, a lot of methods are out there today. So we cannot say anymore today that there is nothing available yet to measure. The question is, what do we use to measure? In which context? So for us, at least in the environmental footprint methodology, for sure a guidance is needed on what to use and also in which situation. It might be that it's not one single method, but depending of the application, depending maybe even of the sector, are we talking about forestry, agriculture, the indicator might be different. But within the application and within the sector, it should be consistent and it should be the same. So we are here also, I mean, as Commission, to learn from you and to invite you to take part also of the working group if you want. It will be announced on our website, so please follow it closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, very much also for keeping to the time. Now I want to introduce to do a presentation, in fact, from Ferrovial and Creando redes, who support them. Valentín Alfaya, who you have heard already this morning, representing the Green Growth Initiative in Spain, will now speak as a representative of Ferrovial, as Quality, Safety and Environment Director. He will say a few words and then he will be followed up by Sandra Magro from Creando redes on their approach.
Thank you very much. Well, no, I don't need it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Johan, for inviting us to take part in this event. So just, I'd like just to frame and to introduce this initiative that we are proudly delivering in partnership with Creando redes, with the University of Salamanca, the Council of Scientific Research, and the University Rey Juan Carlos here in Spain, and the Climate Kick in Europe. So basically, I'd like to let you know in just 3-4 minutes the starting point of this initiative and what we are now thinking of in relation to this initiative from now on. So the first point, the starting point. At the beginning, we were thinking of an internal and also external reporting tool for biodiversity impacts and risks. I have personally to report very frequently to the board of directors of Ferrovial. When I have to report about our climate strategy, it's relatively easy. Even taking into account we are very diverse, so we have many sources of emissions, but at the end you just have one unit, the equivalent tons of CO2. So on the opposite hand, when we have to report, when I had to report in both internally to the board of directors or externally, for example, to the more and more demanding investors, analysts, funds, etc., it was extremely complex to report on our biodiversity impacts and risks. There were many variables, as you may know. We've seen it in the last presentation. You were talking about 16. I think there are even more, much more indicators behind something so extremely complex as an ecosystem, as the functions and the services behind these ecosystems. Many variables, many vectors, and so on. So it was absolutely impossible to let the directors of my board know our real impact on biodiversity. So we were looking for just one sample figure on just one unit. And at the end, we got a couple of conclusions. The first one, the only unit at the end should be dollar, or if you want, euro or pound. Second, this way of assessment should be based on the value, economic value of ecosystem services rather than natural capital itself. These were our two main conclusions. So we developed this tool. You will see now through the smart part of the presentation, and Sandra, you will see how this system and scheme works. after delivering this for reporting internally and externally in Ferrovial, now we are thinking of many other issues. For example, as we are providing an economic value of impacts on biodiversity and in natural capital itself, we can now assess much better and in a much more reliable way, and we can now size new business opportunities around climate, around natural capital and biodiversity, for example, or calculate much better our return on our investments on biodiversity offsetting or in payment for ecosystem services or many other market-based tools that are currently available. Now, we are thinking also not just in getting this advantage about this kind of tools for Ferrovial, but also for other sectors, and particularly financial sector, in the broadest meaning of this sector. So this is what we are thinking of right now, and this is, I think, the next steps that we should be done. I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Sandra Magro, for, as I said earlier, the smart part of the presentation. So, Sandra, please. I think you just have 30 minutes or 40 minutes for the presentation. So.
1,000 presentations. Okay, thank you very much. You're still alive? Everybody's with us? Yeah, where you want? I'll try to be brief. First of all, as Valentín said, we were looking for common grounds. This morning and early in the earlier presentations, we were talking about how to find common languages and common grounds to measure natural capital and to integrate natural capital into business decision. And this is why INCA is about. Actually, INCA is a methodology to measure the natural capital net debt. This methodology, as Valentín said before, comes from the need from companies to include or look for these common languages in between the environmental departments and the financial departments, and also with external stakeholders to give a measure, an integrative measure of environmental risk. Natural capital net debt is an intuitive concept. It means the economic value of the loss of ecosystem services we create when we establish an economic activity in a territory. And for us, as Valentín said before, it was very important to measure this debt in terms of ecosystem services, but also in terms of money. To do so, we follow 3 simple steps. First, we measure what was nature providing before we arrived to a territory. It's what is the value and the quantity of ecosystem services before any action is destroying or transforming the ecosystems. Afterwards, we measure the profit and loss and the losses and the gains with the project we are creating in the territory. And finally, we found a way to report this information not only for our groups in the internal part of the company, but also to external stakeholders. And this is the sum up of our methodology. First of all, we create an ecosystem services baseline. We find and design the algorithms that allow us to extract this information about the quantity and the quality of ecosystem services in place. For us, it was very important, and it was beyond measuring only biodiversity, but it is also include, in a way, we are just measuring what are the goods and the services that the biodiversity in a place it's able to provide. So for us, it was very important also to work side by side with Ferrovial departments in order to look for these trustworthy indicators, not just for the corporate level, but also for technicians. In a second phase, what we did, it was to extract and standardize the environmental impact that Ferrovial creates for their projects directly from their environmental assessment procedures and also from the construction drawings. This point was key because we think that if we want to include natural capital into decision making in companies' daily life, we need to make it simple. We need to be aligned with the procedures they already use and don't create new concepts and ways of thinking because they want to embrace these new methodologies. Then we also include the positive impacts that the company could create with the mitigation measures. And then when we discount the impacts from the ecosystem services baseline, what we have is the gross loss of natural capital. Then we translated this amount of natural capital that was lost into monetary units. And as you can imagine, this was the key part in order to translate financial departments what we do and what are the risks associated with this kind of projects. This is a short scheme and the work we've done within 6 months. For me, the most important part, and it's also the first objective, is engagement. As I said before, if we cannot engage the people from the company and also the external stakeholders, also the financial sector, we won't be able to create a standard. This morning we were talking about lots of hours about how to create a standard, how to make comparable measures. So we have to be all in the same page. So starting from the company, this is our way to get in the same page. And finally, for me, it was also surprising because I'm convinced about the importance of these measurements. But for me, it was really nice to be part of this process and to know that there are really real outcomes also for the companies. We're providing high quality data, not just in the environmental part, but behind this natural capital net debt, there is a high quality and quantitative information about environmental impact. So we can use it to create a more cost-effective compensation and restoration measures. And this is the first step to include natural capital into a decision-making. And also with the monetary units, with the economic value of natural capital that has been lost, we also can create maybe financial products or also try to see new ways or new business opportunities related to this natural capital net debt. To make this methodology more reliable, we tested with real data. We choose a railway construction that Ferrovial has in the southeast of Spain, that it's almost affecting shrublands and sparse crop, but anyway, this is a huge area in Spain occupied by this type of ecosystem. So, and it was the first time that we have the ability to measure environmental impact in terms of ecosystem services. So now we can quantify, what are we losing and what should we do to compensate this loss, right? So we measure this natural capital net debt in terms of all type of ecosystem services. We are losing mostly ecosystem services of croplands that are related to livestock and hunting, but also for free food and fruit crops. And we are also losing some regulating services and some cultural services that we put into a context of monetary units. And that's all. That's all we've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Now we quickly go back to the second part of the first presentation. Sorry about this mess in the sequence of the of the slides, but we'll manage. Because this will be then an intro to the. Yeah, it's a lot of slides apparently that we had. Oh. Yeah, it's the opposite way. And now it's nothing anymore. Okay. We are in group session 2 now. Okay, I think we need some technical assistance. No, this is not. Huh? No, I'm going forward. Fantastic, fantastic. You see, I try to do technical assessments of biodiversity measurement approaches, but I'm not the real technician. So what I just wanted to present you before we start the plenary discussion, where you also have the availability to ask more specific questions on the presentations that have been presented to you, is the subgroup 1 of the aligning biodiversity measures for businesses, subgroup on business applications. As I explained to you, a biodiversity measurement approach, the selection of a suitable biodiversity measurement approach is very much dependent of the type of business application that you want to select for your company. What do we mean with that? And it's a concept that comes from the Natural Capital Protocol also. So companies can be interested to assess their current performance in terms of biodiversity. They can be interested to think about future scenarios and future biodiversity performance. Or they can set a number of targets. I come back to that immediately, like the planetary boundaries or the SDGs or legal targets, all in terms of biodiversity, and they want to track progress to these targets. Or they want to compare options, for instance, investment options, different locations, different products, all from the perspective of biodiversity. These are all different types of business applications. And it's very important to keep that in mind, and it determines a lot the choice of a suitable biodiversity measurement approach. With regard to the third business application, tracking progress to targets, we identified a number of potentially suitable targets in terms of biodiversity. And you see it's about, as I said, SDGs, planetary boundaries, no net loss. It could be a very useful target that you set as a company for biodiversity. And we have defined a number of other potential biodiversity targets. Science-based targets could be integrated also once they are available for biodiversity. Now, a second entrance is the organizational focus area. And also this concept comes from the Natural Capital Protocol, by the way. So it is, you need to decide when you are going to measure biodiversity performance, is it for the whole company at corporate level, or is it just for one site, or is it at a project level, or is it for the supply chain, or a specific product? So of course this is extremely crucial. So we took this concept over from the Natural Capital Protocol in order to use the same, so not to reinvent the wheel and to start from what's already available, not to confuse people. And based on these two entrances, we created a matrix where you see there the organizational focus area. And here we listed in red all the different business applications, and we asked the tool developers, and there were 12, we did it over the summer, to do a kind of self-assessment. So what is the level of compliance of their specific tool with, in how much does it cover an organizational focus area for a specific business application? So this matrix is a very extended list of information, because we also received a lot of additional narrative information, explanation on how we needed to interpret it. We also asked to add numbers of concrete case studies. So if they have concrete applications for their specific approach for a specific business application related to an organizational focus area, that's then the number of the case studies. So this list is 17 pages long, but we, together with the ABMD initiative, we try to condense it into a much better digestible table, let's say. It still might look like a very chaotic picture. It's also on the website. So it's on the website of the EU Business and Biodiversity platform. It will be integrated in the next update report. It will need some further refinement and so on. But it's you see there are 12 approaches, and you see when you analyze it, you see that you can draw a number of very useful conclusions. You see that some approaches are rather generic and can be applied to quite a lot of these applications related to organizational focus areas, while other methodologies are very specific at the product level, for instance, or at the level of a supply chain. So I don't go further into detail. This matrix, I just want to inform you about the existence of this matrix and that we are further working on it, and that it's available on the website. A number of side comments. It's based on a self-assessment, which means that there is a risk of overselling. Some tool developers, of course, they think that their tool serves a lot of business applications, a lot of potential applications. So therefore, again, we need an assessment, a critical, independent assessment of case studies. Only then we can say, okay, this tool is really useful for that specific situation. This is our ambition for the next years. But overall, the proposed typology in terms of business applications and so on has proved to work. We see that all business applications are covered by one or more tools. We see, fortunately, this year an increasing number of case studies. So, another point that I want to mention, and it relates very much, of course, to this overview matrix, is the decision tree. So it's our ambition, together also with the ABNB initiative and with the Natural Capital Protocol, who's working on a biodiversity supplement now to the Natural Capital Protocol, to provide a decision tree for users trying to select the appropriate measurement tool for their specific purposes. So in the biodiversity supplement, we will provide a very broad decision tree, which also include the first steps, like qualitative checklists. Because we are very much aware that this list of tools is for more advanced companies who are already advanced in terms of biodiversity measurement. Some tools are quite complicated, and the mainstream of the businesses are still in the first steps, so they might need more simple checklists. But our decision tree will fit into that broader decision tree. Now, questions, and this is an intro to the plenary discussion. We want to know from you, for taking a good decision, what would be for you the right criteria to include in such a decision tree? Of course, the previous picture gives already two criteria: the business application, the organizational focus area. But maybe there are more criteria, like data. Are you relying on own company data, own measurements, or will you rely on modeled data, for instance? What impact drivers are covered for biodiversity? For instance, if you have impacts in the marine area, but the tool does not cover marine biodiversity impacts, then you have the wrong tool, of course. So you need to consider this very carefully. So this is, don't focus on the details, but this is the very first preliminary rough concept of such a decision tree. It's based on a number of subsequent questions, and at the end, it should point you to one or more potentially suitable tools. What we have in mind for the future, and definitely for the work under the EU Business and Biodiversity Platform, is to complete this decision tree with a kind of guidance illustrated with concrete case studies, because I think that the best way to inform you is to illustrate it with very concrete case studies. This is work that will be build up during the next months and years. Now, before having a plenary discussion with all the participants, just a quick reflection from you on this work. What do you think about it? What do you suggest to us to focus on in the future? What would be suitable decision criteria? Is this useful work or not? So I'm curious to hear your opinion, and we can spend a few minutes on it. Yeah. So any questions? Or you are all overwhelmed by what we presented? Yeah, I go one slide back. Or maybe, is this what you want to see? No? The questions? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, Nadine McCormick with IUCN. It's really brilliant to see the evolution in the work going forward now, and certainly something when we've been involved early in the project as well, we knew there was this choice paralysis. There's so many assessments out there, so a decision tree is a really very logical way to go. I'm just thinking also about like then the uptake for this and where it can live, and not to live as another document on another website that somebody else has to know to find. And certainly there's a lot of critical mass been built around the NatCap checker, no, wrong one, the NatCap toolkit, which moved to Shift. And I don't know if you've seen that, but actually some of these questions might be really useful for the next iteration of that Shift platform, because those who are at the training session just now, a little plug, those who are at the training session just now, we actually looked at how Shift, you can play with the variables and reduce 200 methods and assessment tools down to 30, which is manageable. So this seems to be like the next iteration, and certainly something that'd be really useful for people who are starting on their journey and just don't know where to start. So a thumbs up, and what's the next uptake level? Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Yes, we are very much aware about that, and yes, it should be integrated. It should all be integrated. Absolutely, you're right. Thank you, Nadine. Other, yes?
Just a suggestion also,
Yes.
by knowing some of the metrics, maybe you could also have the question, what sector are you working on?
Certainly,
Yeah.
definitely. Yes, thank you. Other question? Yes, in the back, Sylvie?
Yes, so Johan, it's absolutely relevant, important, and your previous report was very useful for us. And only one question: is this on the website of European Business and Biodiversity platform? On which form? On interactive?
No.
Platform.
Yeah.
So you could choose. You could no.
Not
It's
yet.
not,
Not yet.
No.
So we will
it's
align.
a pity because it
Yes,
could
of
be
course.
very.
Yes. That would be the ultimate goal. So to have an interactive tool, of course. But we will indeed. We will not invent all these things, as Nadine already suggested. There is already a tool available, and we will align very much with the toolkit, the Natural Capital Toolkit, which is now on mid-shift, and with the Biodiversity supplement to the Natural Capital Protocol. So yeah, it will all be very much aligned and should be made interactive. Other questions before I give the floor also to the other, or to the audience to ask questions for the other participants? Maybe a last question on decision tree, business applications? No? Fine? Okay. Then I invite all the speakers to come to take a seat here in front, in the front. And if there are specific questions related to one of the presentations, I would say go ahead. Any questions on the approach by Ferrovial, maybe? Maybe I can, yes. Marion? Yeah?
Yes, my name is Marion Hammer from Global Nature Fund, and I have a question to Ferrovial. Now you are putting into practice your methodology, and what are you then expecting from your CEO? Are you expecting that your results will be taken into account in regard to new constructions, or do you think that if the result will be that you produced maybe a negative impact on ecosystem services, hopefully not, but will the result then be that you will compensate more than the legally required? Also, what are your expectations?
Well, I have many expectations around that. The first one is that, as you mentioned earlier, this is extremely useful, for example, for comparing alternatives and re-engineering the infrastructures, because you now can compare money to money, investment to investment, and you can choose the less impacting, that in our case means the less cost on or losses in terms of biodiversity and natural capital. This is my first expectation, to compare alternatives, to make our best in reducing our impacts. The second is that now we have a way of understanding the long-term impacts, because as Sandra showed earlier, we are not just looking and showing the impact during construction, but during the life cycle of the infrastructure. So in the medium and long term, we can finance the compensation, but always taking into account, as we said earlier, Luis, taking into account something that is absolutely critical in my view, which is the implementation of the hierarchy principle of mitigation. Because compensation is good, offsetting is good, but just for residual impacts. We have a long room for improving our ecological restoration schemes, for example. We can even finance our debt by starting up and funding new ecological restoration. And everything, and this is my last expectation, everything under the principle, the global principle, including our vision and our policy of no net loss of biodiversity across the different business areas of Ferrovial.
Okay, thank you. Maybe first the gentleman there.
I had a question for Creando Redes. With your methodology, how did you look at connectivity? Because these infrastructural projects, it's not the actual land use only, but the barriers that they can form, which maybe, especially when comparing options, can be quite relevant.
Yeah, of course, you're right. Actually, it's something that we measure, include in a regulation and provision services, which is the habitat for species. So we know how much habitat we're losing, but not with a specific view on the connectivity, because we are not, for example, seeing what is this infrastructure interacting with the rest of the activities on the territory. For me, it was the next step forward. This morning we were talking about land degradation neutrality. I think that our methodology is on the basis on try to compensate or look for synergistic impacts. But by now we just can see how much habitat we are losing.
There was another question here.
Also for Creando Redes, on the methodology, because you monetize the impacts, and I understand why, but there's also their value judgments in choosing which type of monetary estimates. And I was wondering if you have some kind of sensitivity analysis with different type of monetization techniques to at least be more certain of the results.
Can you give a short?
Yeah, I would try to be short, but maybe Fernando Rodriguez, which is at the bottom of the room, will give you some details during the break, but very brief. We use the transference of benefits, and we decided to use this methodology to value ecosystem services because it also integrates many information about the economic and the social context. Sometimes we think that the value of an ecosystem service is the value itself, but it depends on if there were some market networks that can sell and buy these ecosystem services, if there were local communities using, so the prices and the value is increasing. So that's why we use this approach.
Yeah, but yes, might become a technical discussion, and it's really environmental economics, if I may, and because time is really proceeding. Yeah, but time is proceeding very rapidly, and I would like to give the floor also to Mark Goedkoop, who might have a question in terms of life cycle assessment, I suspect.
Indeed, I wanted to ask Anne, indeed. So how do you foresee that if you invite more experts from this community? Many methods here typically focus on land use, but you also saw that there is about 7 or 8 other impact categories. So if you would only improve the land use, you would have kind of double count with the others. So how do you foresee that? And maybe connect to that, wouldn't it be wise to first try to define what the Commission actually means with biodiversity and put some criteria up front? Because that is what we did when we actually recommended those topics to the Commission many, many years ago. I was in that project. We start with criteria, and when you have the criteria clear, then you can start to think of a methodology development, I think.
I mean, the first question is easier than the second. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure we will definitely not only focus on land use, that's for sure. I mean, in an ideal case, for me, actually, the minimum achievement would be to have an additional indicator which is next to the 16 indicators which addresses biodiversity, which can indeed, and most probably will be a double counting of the 8 indicators, so land use, acidification, whatever. But it's just to improve the way of communication afterwards for our policy goals. But indeed, when you talk about the goals and the criteria, what do we want? This is a discussion which is ongoing right now. So we are discussing with the different parties that are involved with the different initiatives in the Green Deal. Indeed, to define what we want, and I hope this is more clear by January. Then when we start end of January, we'll start the working group. Also, the working group, I want to keep it restricted. So the list will be open to participate, but in the end, I hope to not have more than 40 people to make it workable.
That's already a lot, huh? More than 40 people. Any further burning questions? Yeah, no, Marianne? Yeah, okay. You're the only one, so.
See, one more question to you, Johan.
Yeah.
As you know, we are working very much on the food sector and also in biodiversity performance tool monitoring, etc. And it's about data availability. And you told before that there is an still increasing number of eco-labels and certifications and so on. And this is especially true for the food sector, that there are only for Europe, there are more than 400 different certifications, and all these certifications do have very exact data on food production, because they go to the farm and they measure, or they control the measurement, etc., etc. And my question is, did you have also some contacts to food standards or to other standards, and to, in the best case, to agree with them to have an exchange or to increase the availability of data?
No. And we won't start with that either. So that's why we approached you, because we know that you had an umbrella tool, let's say, for the food sector, and we will not start with assessing all these certification schemes, not at all.
It's not assessing, it's a question of collaboration.
Yes, 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 yes. No, but Yeah, it will absolutely be very interesting, but we need to focus on we have our priorities, and the priorities now are, we have a number of strong biodiversity measurement approaches which are under full development, and we concentrate on these approaches, and the next step is case studies and assessing case studies, and I think this is the line of working now, this is the priority. Yeah. Any, Stefan? Okay.
Now, from your experience so far, I mean, would it be possible to say, as any business CEO, I want to commit that my business is biodiversity net positive by a certain date? I mean, the tools are there, the information are there, or based on your work, this is still very much in the making, and giving them this CEO methodology that yes, you can do this commitment and there are ways for you to measure progress towards.
Yeah, well, my personal opinion on that is that, and I really welcome commitments like planetary boundaries or zero impact, no net loss, net gain. I see that companies commit to such types of declarations by a certain time frame, 2030, without even having the right tools to make this true. But it puts they put themselves under pressure, and I think that's the right way forward. It stimulates innovation, and if we can help with that, because at this moment there is none of these biodiversity measurement approaches is cover all the value chain of measuring or net gain in terms of biodiversity. So it requires, at site level, project level, this is the most feasible at this moment. Yeah, that you can measure quite well, and you can compensate and achieve no net loss and net gain. But starting with the supply chain is an enormous challenge, and it relates a lot to availability of data and the exact traceability of where all your supplies come from, because there are a lot of intermediary traders in the whole supply chain. So this remains a huge challenge, but I would say don't wait until we have the perfect. Just start working on it and evolve. Yeah, that would be. I don't know if there are comments on this statement from other people or from the audience. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Then I think time to close this session. I hope it was useful for you. Thank you for your attention, and enjoy the further conference. Thanks.